Well, it's an acquittal for the former president of Ivory Coast, who's been jailed for 7 years for war crimes. The International Criminal Court ruled the prosecution has not proved its case against Laurent Gbagbo. 3,000 people were killed in post-election violence when Gbagbo refused to leave office. The court ruled Gbagbo should be released from prison immediately.
The Chamber, by majority, hereby decides that the prosecutor has failed to satisfy the burden of proof to the requisite standard as foreseen in Article 66 of the Rome Statute, grants the defense motions for acquittal from all charges against Mr. Laurent Gbagbo and Mr. Charles Ble Goude, orders the immediate release of both accused.
Let's go live now to Nicholas Hack, who's standing by for us in Abidjan. Nick, what kind of a reaction are we seeing on the streets there?
I think you can see right behind me, people are streaming out of their workplace onto the streets. Just a moment ago, the crowd behind me were chanting, "Gbagbo free, Gbagbo free." It's a victory for his supporters, especially in this neighborhood of Yopougon, a popular suburb of Abidjan. We saw at the International Criminal Court itself an uproar. Charles Ble Goude, Gbagbo's right-hand man, hugging Gbagbo. Really, and at the same time here in Abidjan, the same uproar. I've seen women fainting on the streets. Really an outpour of joy here on the streets of Yopougon. Why? Well, because despite being held at the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity, he remains a popular figure of the opposition here in Ivory Coast. Notably, since the liberation of his wife, Simone Gbagbo, that happened just a few months ago, she was being held on charges of crimes against humanity here in a court in Ivory Coast and was released. In December, she anticipated the announcement made today saying that her husband could be freed. At that moment, there were people going out on the streets, partying, and it's certainly going to be a party here in this neighborhood. But there are the 8,000 victims of the civil war and of this contested election of 2010-11 who still want to see justice. For some, the fact that Gbagbo has been freed from the ICC, or at least cleared from detention, is a move towards reconciliation. But for others, it's a blow towards a certain type of justice that people here are seeking. No matter what, the fact that the prosecutors at the International Criminal Court, despite 80 witnesses, thousands of documents, were not able to bring charges that provide sufficient evidence for the judges to rule is a real blow to the prosecution, who's really under pressure. We've heard Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, calling the International Criminal Court back in September, describing it as a rogue court. For many people here, they see that tribunal as charging, over-representing and charging mostly African leaders. We've seen the Kenyan president, Kenyatta, that was held at the ICC. We saw Jean-Pierre Bemba from the vice president of the DRC that was then released a few months ago. Now, many people here feel that the justice there isn't actually a justice that people want to see here. Here in Ivory Coast, they want to see the victims facing those that perpetrated those crimes. But for the moment, the release of Laurent Gbagbo for people here is a victory. Nastasia?
Al Jazeera's Nicholas Hack with that update from Abidjan. Thanks very much, Nick. Well, Jeffrey Nice is a law professor at Gresham College and a former prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, who led the case against Slobodan Milosevic. He joins us now on Skype from The Hague. Sir, given that Gbagbo's already been in prison for 7 years and now he's been acquitted of all charges, many will be thinking this doesn't inspire a huge amount of confidence in the ICC.
That's one of the consequences of this type of decision. And generally, where you have split decisions, and this is a 2-1 decision after years and years of evidence, it's hard to explain to the ordinary not the ordinary, the non-specialist member of the public, why they should repose trust in judges. So that's the first problem. Second problem is the African problem to which your correspondent referred. Rightly or wrongly, the court's been accused of being an anti-African court. And with Bemba and Kenyatta acquitted finally, and maybe these two men now acquitted finally, that's further going to say that the original pursuit of African leaders was wrong in the first place. The third thing is that it is just very difficult to prove leadership cases. And I don't mean to prove them on the basis that they are in fact true cases, but it's hard to prove them. It's actually very hard to know on the basis of evidence or otherwise when and whether a leader is responsible for the actions of those committing terrible offences on the ground. He may be, and he may have hidden his connection or obscured it, or he may not be, and others may have been acting independently or at a lower level of responsibility. So for all those reasons, this decision is not good for international justice and not good for expecting people to repose trust in it. On the other hand, and I heard a reference to Trump's attempts to destroy the court, this court, and others like it, but principally this court, must be given support because it is, in principle, the only mechanism that can bring judicial oversight to crimes committed in conflict. And once this court's gone, which is what Trump would like, there will be no way of supervising conflicts either when they're going on or after they're finished.
So let me ask you about that, because as you say, 3 African leaders have now had their convictions overturned, and that's presumably not helping with credibility. Just how damaging is this for the credibility of the ICC, and could it affect ongoing cases awaiting trial?
I don't know about cases awaiting trial, but I do think that it's going to affect the credibility of the court at exactly the time when it needs to gain in credibility. Some would say that, first of all, some would say that this particular case was overlain with political pressure right from the beginning, French pressure. And if there's any truth in that, then to have yielded to that pressure and to have brought these proceedings when they should never have been brought is not only bad for the particular case and bad for the particular defendant, but it's bad for justice. And we have seen similar examples of pressure brought against prosecutors, on prosecutors, in order to bring people to trial or not to bring them to trial. And all of that shows that if there's going to be a future for international justice, it has to be run by people who are absolutely free of political pressure. Not saying these were subject to pressure, but there are certainly accounts of it. So that's one very important lesson that we should learn.
So many would argue that there is an inherent tension between international justice and potential reconciliation. Which side of that debate do you come down upon? Because a lot of people in Ivory Coast would say, well, this actually sets the country on a path closer towards peace.
The peace and justice debate is a difficult one. I've changed my view over the years. I am now firmly in favour of justice in some form, always being registered in respect of conflicts. Doesn't necessarily have to be by very long trials against the leaders. It has to be by some mechanism that leads a reliable, judicially measured record of events. It can be indeed by peace commissions, it can be by informal tribunals, or it can be by formal tribunals. What has to happen is that those tribunals have to have ready and quick access to evidence, and they have to be able to bring in decisions in a reasonably quick period, a reasonably short period of time, because the prolongation of these trials, and this isn't the only example of this, just extend the misery, the unhappiness, and the intentions in the place where the conflict originally occurred. But should there be judicial oversight in some form or another, in my view, always, should circumstances, say, for example, in the crimes committed, if there were crimes, in North Korea, should they now be quietly set aside, despite the strongest of reports suggesting that terrible international crimes are being committed there, because maybe you can bring North Korea and South Korea together? No, there has to be left some kind of reliable judicial record. And here in Côte d'Ivoire, there ought to be some satisfactory, judicially overseen process that will be able to leave the present and future inhabitants of Côte d'Ivoire able to know what happened and where responsibility lay. But it just may be that these long criminal trials against individuals are not the best way of doing that.
Geoffrey Nice, a former prosecutor at the ICTY, thank you so much for your insight, sir.
You're welcome.